Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Genta Hatchery. I'm Digital Innovation Delivery Lead at LOTI. And in today's show and tell, we'll be providing you with an update and where we've got to on the project called Developing a Multi-Agency Data Platform for Frontline Care Workers. This is a project that's being led by London boroughs of Hounslow and Brent in partnership with London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, and Social Finance. The usual housekeeping reminders: please stay on mute if you are not speaking. We'd love to see who's in the room today, so please do introduce yourselves in the chat. And in terms of format for today, so the first part of the session will consist of a presentation from the project team. In the second part, you will have an opportunity to provide feedback and ask any questions you may have. If a question occurs to you during the presentation, please do put these in the chat and the project team will do their best to answer them there and then. Without further ado, let's quickly provide you with a reminder of this project. So this project is one of two projects that LOTI funded as part of our new service models in social care innovation fund. The project was awarded 100K to develop this initiative. In the next slide, you'll see a very short reminder of what we are trying to achieve. So the project is seeking to develop a prototype multi-agency platform that aims to equip frontline care workers with better information about the residents in their care so they can put together care packages that are appropriate and relevant for the service users. Now I will hand over to Harry, who will take us through the progress updates.
Harry, you're on mute. It looked great, what you were saying.
Look at that, dove into it and on mute. So hi everyone, my name's Harry Angus. I'm an associate at Social Finance, which is a not-for-profit social enterprise based in London that delivers consultancy and social impact projects across a range of topic areas. I sit within the data and digital team, which has done loads of projects with LOTI before and other councils, health settings, etc., to basically deliver social impact in the data and digital space. And so this has been a really exciting project, which started up in April of this year. And we basically split the project across 4 phases. Last time we came and spoke to you while we were just launching into our targeted discovery phase, where we were starting to talk to practitioners about the prospective tool and how that might look. And we're now very much in this design and prototyping phase, taking our learning from that discovery and then trying to build a prototype. And so this all came about, this project, from an earlier prototype and solution that we developed called Family Context, which I'll just open up here. And Family Context has been deployed in a couple of councils in the children's settings and is basically designed to improve the understanding of a professional network around an individual when they come in through the front door of that setting. And so this is a quick demo of it. If you search for the individual in here, so this is all depersonalized data, I can then see Charlie Banks that are on record. When I click into him, I can then see across different services who is involved. And so unlike a kind of shared care record, this is not designed to give all the juicy details about a case. It's designed to basically surface the professional involvement as quick as possible and give contact details for those that are involved, to basically speed up the delays that you can experience from trying to understand who that professional network is. And so when LOTI announced the Innovation in Adult Social Care Fund, it was a really exciting opportunity to test this within the adults context, because we have tested it in the children's space. We know we can share the data. We know we can achieve efficiencies and improve how services are delivered in the front door. So it was a really good test case to see if we could do that in the adult setting as well. And so coming back to the slides here, as you'll see, I spoke through that last time we were here, we talked about our plans for discovery and interviewing practitioners. And so today we've really excitingly got a whole bunch of people from across the project. So myself, Mark from Hounslow, Maddie from Brent, and Sadia from Chelsea and Westminster Hospital to all offer our reflections on how the project's been so far and what our plans are for the rest of the project. The user groups we interviewed then back in April across to June were the front door staff within local authorities. And so staff within Brent and Hounslow sat within the front door for adult services. And so this is the kind of first port of call where people are concerned about an individual that they call up, relay their concerns, where an individual then working within the local authority will then conduct an assessment to understand the needs of that individual to then develop a care package to put in place. So that's where that's where the children's family context sits. And so our initial hunch was that it would be useful there. But also there are hospital practitioners as well within Chelsea and Westminster Hospital and other hospitals all across London, where we thought there would be some value in having a tool displaying the professional network as well. So we spoke to some practitioners within the hospital. And then finally, there's a hospital social work team, both within Brent and Hounslow. So this is a team embedded within the hospital who basically, when an individual comes into hospital, they can assess the care package of that individual upon release to make sure that it's suitable for their needs once they're discharged back into the community. And so we had a hunch that there would be a good use case across all of these. And so we wanted to speak to practitioners about where the use case was strongest and also about what information they would like to see within the tool to help them do their jobs more effectively. And so we've got a bunch of about 10 findings here, which are kind of core things of what they told us. And I'm not going to go into each one because we'll share the slides afterwards so you can go through these yourself. But this gives you kind of a high level understanding of what our findings are from the interviews. And so I'm going to focus on a couple of these. What we were maybe a bit surprised by is that the tool that we're proposing isn't going to be useful in absolutely every case. We found that most practitioners reflected that there are a handful of cases that take them a lot of time because they spend a lot of time chasing information, on hold with services, trying to work out the right individual involved. And it's those cases where we found that the tool had the biggest use case. It's not so much the sort of thing where we envisaged that practitioners would log on for every single case to the tool to try and understand the professional network, just those where they're struggling around it. So that was a bit of a surprise for us. The other absolute thing that we heard from our interviews was that there is a strong appetite for this tool, because this fundamental worry here that practitioners worry that they're carrying out work that has been done by someone else in the system, because all of these systems are in silos and don't have great connectivity between them. Practitioners are really worried that they're doing an assessment which has already been completed by someone else, or someone else is already holding the information and they're having to spend time tracking it down. So there's a lot of duplication across the system as a whole. And what we're hoping is that by embedding this tool within these two local authorities, it can make a real difference there. Here are some continued things around what they told us. And what we found out in the end was that the appetite within the health setting, because there are integrated patient records which are starting to emerge, and other solutions, we found that the use case was less strong within the hospital setting itself, because the services being delivered there are more acute. And so what we found is that we found that the tool has a greater and stronger use case within triage practitioners. So within that front door and back door, if you like, and so that hospital social care service and the front door, because clinicians in the hospital are so much more worried about the juicy detail about a case, and so detailed information about case summaries from historic things. We found that the use case for a professional linkage tool was less strong, and that could be taken up by integrated patient records or other solutions. And so that was quite interesting. We do need to bear in mind what adverse effects or blowback effects might come from such a tool as well. And there were some highlighted fears that the tool could alter decision making and lead to patients falling through the net. And so this is around if someone were to access a tool and see, yes, they're already being worked with by this service or whoever, it might lead practitioners to say, actually, I'm not going to therefore refer it on. But there's all sorts of problems with data quality, all sorts of problems with missing data as well. So we need to be really careful about how we frame the tool and train out the usage of it to make sure that these blowback effects are minimized. And so this is just kind of high level finding what we found. But the other big part of speaking practitioners over the course of the research was about owning in on what were the highly desired data sets that they would like to see within here. And so these are our final set that we've identified. We're looking at community health services, GP registration data, mental health services that they're accessing, dementia support services, housing, occupational therapy sits within community health services, adult social care, so what support they're receiving from the local authority, who their next of kin is, hospital information, so when they've been recently discharged, a very frequent presenter at A&E, and finally an NHS number. And so these have been the priority data sets which have been identified to us as would have the most impact for practitioners. And so the next part of the project, which I'm going to go and speak on to in a little while, is basically identifying where these data sets are held, engaging with the owners of the data sets, and then securing their release to support the prototype. I'm going to hand over to Mark next to give a kind of local authority view of what the experience has been like in Hounslow of the project and how this has impacted their decision making and their hopes to be used going forward.
Thanks, Harry. Just a quick one. My name is Mark Edmonds. I'm a delivery manager at Hounslow, working closely on this project with Harry and Genta and Maddie, etc. So just thought it'd be useful as we've got to this stage in the project to give you sort of the Hounslow experience and what we've had to consider to get to the point that where we are with this project. So the first slide here is really about a bit of context of where we are. This is Hounslow is in the process of developing a business intelligence and data strategy, and we've got some key ambitions, and really this is about the journey that we're on at the moment, where this project sort of dovetails in. So what we've been able to identify with help from Socratim and other inputs is that we're really keen to be able to listen to all our customers, measure performance, and improve services. Those are our long-term ambitions, and what those ideals or ambitions require are integrated data to better understand user journeys and to achieving future outcomes which we desire. And what we think this project has enabled us to do is to advance and accelerate those ideas and those ambitions as we've sort of tried to work this project into the data intelligence strategy work, which is going on within Hounslow at the same time. Next slide, please, Harry. So in terms of the sort of technical and data considerations, so with Hounslow, I would say that we were a less data mature authority than Brent, for example. We don't have an existing data warehouse, and so this project, in a sense, we're learning how to develop a data repository and what data structures that we need or what considerations we need all the way through from developing the repository to understanding the structure and the hierarchy of data that we need to include. So in terms of building a data repository, I think this is just a useful checklist for anybody who's going through this process, and if this is going to be rolled out later on, again, some key sort of considerations that are required. So to understand what the business and security requirements are is really important. So for us, one of the key learning points was that health data has historically had quite a strong security environment and arrangement, and they will not share health organizations will not share data to a less security focused environment. So therefore you have to match that environment to be able to receive information. So that's a key issue. We need to understand the resources that are required to build a repository. So we've spent quite a bit of time understanding who will be who are the architects, who are the designers, who have the data, who has the data information that we need to consider, who do we need to talk to generally across the organizations that we're dealing with. Then we've had to develop a technical specification with the data schemas in. So, for example, we had data schemas from WSIC, which is the Northwest London whole system integrated data set. So we knew what sort of data was being held and stored, but we needed to understand how we were going to retrieve that data and receive that data and how we could process that data. Then we needed to identify how, working from scratch again, what sort of platform we can build and what sort of capabilities do we require. For Hounslow, for example, we're building this in AWS because that's our current provider, and we can get some assisted support with that. But in terms of building this, we've also had to work with social finance and their sort of technical leads to be able to understand how their product or tool points to this database to extract the information and surface that information as required to the practitioners. So again, lots of work to understand that, and to be able to work that through in a meaningful way and to build that repository, we set up a technical data working group, and that technical working group contained all the sort of roles and responsibilities I've mentioned today, but key people from Hounslow, people from Brent are invited to that. We've also got social finance and their technical lead, and we've got our sort of data architects and our system architects in that same room, and we come into that stand up on a bi-weekly basis to talk through progress, any sticking points, what's stopping progress. Then we've had to agree the future design and the build. We're in that process at the moment, and as I said right up front, all the learning from this exercise is fed into the wider business intelligence work streams going on in the council. So it's actually, as I said, accelerated that work and accelerated our knowledge and our knowledge transfer to colleagues working on a wider project. Next slide, please, Harry. In terms of data and IG considerations, I'll just run through these quickly because I'm conscious of time. But basically, the first thing you needed to identify is what services were the practitioners.
Can anyone? I can't hear Mark.
I think we've lost Mark.
Mark,
I'll jump in. Whilst we wait for him, I'll jump in and just carry on. So this was very much about how we've approached the IG to it. Oh, you back, Mark?
Yes, I can see. I'm fully connected, so don't know what's happening. Tell me if I go off again, Harry. I won't interrupt. Yeah, so we need to be clear about, you need to be clear about what data you want and what you want to collect and process and why you need it. That's a good IG recommendation. Data requests need to be broad and proportionately balanced. So you're not going in to say grabbing all data and doing a sort of fishing expedition. You're being fairly focused around what data you want and what is needed to deliver the job in hand. Data security, as I mentioned before, needs to be ironed out in an early stage. So we went directly to health colleagues, asked them what their security requirements were to ensure that whatever we built was in line with what they would consider a safe environment to host any information in. Reach agreement and buy-in from all the data controllers. One of the first meetings that Harry and myself went to was in Northwest London IG board, and we went in making a request for WSIC data, and we came out with about 6 follow-up meetings that we needed to go to. So those meetings were really about ensuring that we spoke to the actual data controllers rather than the processors to be able to access the data. So a key learning point there for us. Identify and understand multi-agency governance processes. Again, that's linked to the previous one where we had to go to those that meeting We have to get agreement from the IG board to be able to progress it, but we also have to go to each individual data controller and understand what their whether they're bought into the project, whether they agree to it, and whether we can use their data, and they will sign off and approve that and go through a DPIA process with them individually before we can go back to the IG board to gain approval. On top of that, if you're dealing with health as well and you're introducing a new system, you also have to go through the new systems committee. And that's basically a check and a balance board within the NHS, which appraises the product to ensure it doesn't conflict and it aligns how it aligns with.
I think we've lost Mark again. So let's give him 10 more seconds.
And one of the major things is establish good working relationships with other organisations working.
Mark, we
Over to Maddie.
Fab.
Good timing there. So yeah, I'm Madeleine. I'm one of the digital program managers at Brent and digital transformation team. So as Mark alluded to, we already have a data lake at Brent, and we currently are using our data lake for kind of a couple of dashboards as a bit of a test before we enter this project. So we have one which is around financial inclusion, so you can imagine the type of data that's pulling together, and we also have one for children's services, which is very much pulling together some existing housing data and some early years and schools data to really kind of look at that fuller picture of children and where they might need support and their families might need support as a bigger context. So we're familiar, I guess, with kind of multiple data sets coming together and being used as an assisted thing for decision making. We're never going to say these will make the decisions, but that's kind of our view with data lake. It's that access to a wealth of information that we already have, just sat on different systems. The next stage of our data lake, and this is really important before I go on to the next slide, is we're actually looking at bringing in kind of vulnerability data, but also bringing in wards are kind of raising similar complaints versus others and kind of using that to inform policy going forward. And that also contributes to our kind of 360 insight of any resident who engages with us, that we can see interactions they've had with adult social care, with housing, with council tax teams, or with our customer services team as well, with the sole goal of kind of improving that resident journey and experience when interacting with the council. At the moment, our primary focus is really the user adoption. I think everyone on this call, we love our data, we love our digital, we're sold on this product, but it's actually getting kind of the staff to engage with it and to really engage with the training that's taking place and get familiar with the system that's there. And we've kind of spoken with this project that that's going to be really, it's a great system, but how do we get kind of people within adult social care to make best use of it? And that's kind of the training, and the user adoption will hopefully build on the existing training that's gone on within Brent. Go to the next slide. Thanks, Harry. So with this particular project, our data journey was around integrating with our existing data lake. But because of the amount of data that we already have in there and our potential to increase more data into there going forward, we really had to look at how we could sit this on our data lake, but also keep it separate. So it wouldn't actually harm any data that was already there or impact any of the dashboards that already exist. So that's been a very good test for us to really understand how that works, where it can sit and what that's going to look like. Obviously, if we invest in this longer term, we'd want it to integrate fully, but while we're in that pilot stage, it gives us that opportunity to actually test the infrastructure and host it, but not impact the wider data lake going forward. We have also been the complicated partner, and we're not on AWS, we're with Azure. So we've been working with Harry and his team to also build it in a way that can sit on Azure, and that's actually working really positively, kind of building on that. So that's the great thing of the flexibility of the family context tool, that you're not limited to use one type of stack. You can kind of flex it to what suits you best. So it's been a good test. I think Harry will agree. We're still on the journey, but it's been a good way to see it. but also it started that discussion on how can we use our data lake better. We've used it with internal data, but actually there's a lot of data in the borough that we can use going forward. So whether it's health, but also the police and other partners, and just, yes, we've seen the complexity, but hopefully this opens the opportunity to kind of build on that relationship and that data sharing going forward. But I think, as Mark alluded to, we've kind of had the same challenges with that, but hopefully we'll build on that going forward. And then last but not least, we're very fortunate at Brent to have our data ethics board. So this is an advisory board that we have made up of independent individuals, from lawyers to doctors, residents. It's a wide-ranging group, and really some data experts in there as well. And the purpose of it is for them to question and analyse what we're doing and really make us think about, yeah, the ethical implications of us collecting this data, sharing this data and using this data. So we went along, and there's kind of a list of questions that they touch, so particularly around training and capacity to manage the project going forward, that it's not just a one-hit wonder, that it's maintained, but also we have that governance and compliance that I know we spoke about a bit earlier. I think the main interest from them was around individuals' mental health data and using that, and also the importance of engaging with their next of kin if they were residents with dementia. So it's that consent versus kind of us using the data we already have. And it was really helpful discussion for us to understand how we might engage with them more going forward if we choose to use this tool more, that we actually promote and make people aware that it's going on and kind of have their feedback as part of that, so that we can keep developing the tool to make best use of it. But it's very helpful to have that discussion and just think of it, because I think we've thought of it purely from an inside point of view, but how can we engage residents who will be benefiting from it in the long run, but engaging with the development of the product. So that's kind of the next steps on that. We're going to go back to our data ethics board in a few months to kind of report what's going on and how it's progressed, and kind of have that very open conversation through the lifetime of this project, because it's really helpful just having that external insight into anything we're developing. So we welcome the use of a data ethics board on this. I think I'm handing over to Dada now.
Thanks so much. And I'm sorry I missed the beginning of this. I'm Sati Khan. I'm one of the cardiology consultants based on the West Middlesex site in Hounslow. And I thought I'd add a very brief health perspective, in addition to Mark's earlier comments about how many committees and additional work steps we put in the way. So Mark and I have been working together for a little while, particularly around the concept of digitally enabled care, which clearly is very heavily reliant on data. And the National Health Service nationally is moving into a virtual ward programme where increasingly patients are being managed using digital tools, but in the community and in their home environment. And we recognise that in order to do that, actually community engagement, not just the data ethics and the ethical components of that, but true community engagement is a key part of this. And that's been a strong feature of the work in this project. I think the other thing I'd really highlight is, and Maddie's already mentioned this, around sharing data and sharing resource, that actually this enables us to really work in partnership rather than duplicating stuff that we all already do and reinventing wheels. So I'm really grateful to be part of this. Thank you so much. That's it from me.
So just some closing comments from me. I think what all of the speakers' comments of evidence is that this isn't just a kind of prototype data tool project. It's very much being used as a catalyst to improve how things are done and how information is shared between different organizations, and also implementing considerations around the data ethics more widely across projects. And so it's been a really exciting thing to be a part of, because it's not just a single product, I'd say, project. It's much more about that kind of wider implementation and wider benefits that can be seen by developing that product. And so coming up next, I talked through the priority data sets earlier, and so we're now focusing on securing the data transfer of as many of those high priority data sets as time allows. So we prioritize those. We're trying to push on where the doors are already open, so where we've already got really good connections. Sadia is helping us with some of those. We have good connections with the community hospital in Hounslow, for instance, and we've had really positive meetings about securing data transfer to support the prototype. And so once we've identified and managed to secure a few of those, both internally to Brent and Hounslow and externally, we'll deploy this prototype solution within Hounslow and Brent. which will then allow us to test that solution with frontline practitioners. Obviously, that's not going to have every data set that practitioners identified to us as useful. And so then on the back of that testing, we'll be able to iterate the tool and produce a product roadmap, including recommendations of how this tool can be taken from prototype into a live tool, which can be actually used within those 2 sites to support the decision making going forward beyond the kind of prototype project and beyond this project. And finally, the final big output from us is going to be a toolkit for other LAs looking to replicate. And so evidencing all the learning that we've had across the project, comparing what the experience has been like in Hounslow, where Mark has outlined that they're slightly less data mature, and Brent, where they've already got a data lake, how this has gone. All of the code for family context is open source and available, so that will be included within the toolkit. And all of the work on IG as well. So the DPAs we produced, the data sharing agreements between the organisations, and our approach to using the legal bases to share this. And so we're using the CARE Act as our legislative basis to share information here. The CARE Act has loads of provisions around how local authorities should work with health settings to improve patient well-being, to work together better, to improve the integration of services. And so we're very much using that legislation as our legislative framework to share information to support the tool. So we're at a really exciting phase. We're going to carry on to about December, which is when we estimate that our funding will kind of run out. And then beyond that, we're hoping then that the roadmap can be used to help Hounslow and Brent take this tool beyond the prototype. So really exciting, been a really good project so far, heard lots of really valuable things which will be useful for others. And so that's the final slide. Really happy to open now for questions and answers. So we haven't spoken for too long and you're all still engaged. And so yeah, looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thanks, Harry. There is a question in the chat about the benefits of including assistive technology and telecare data. So did you want to cover that? Did that kind of data sets come up in your interviews with various people as part of the project, or did the project even consider those types of data sets?
We didn't hear about assistive tech in the interviews because I think we were very much focused on more of the kind of actual services that people were accessing, so named practitioners. And so there's this careful balance between how you position the tool, whether it's a signposting tool, which is designed to help practitioners engage with other practitioners around a case, or whether it becomes a more kind of wider vulnerability tool, which is, I think, where the assistive tech is sort of positioned. However, a couple of people did raise to us that it would be useful to know whether people do already have pendants or assistive tech within their households to stop them making referrals. And so I think that's definitely something which we want to take through to the testing of the prototype once we get there, as does it just being a signposting tool go far enough in helping improve benefits and outcomes for patients, or does it need to go a bit further, more towards the kind of shared care record space of having the vulnerability information stored in here as well, because it's a slightly different use case and slightly different legal basis needed for that. And so it's definitely something we're looking to test.
Thanks, Harry. John, I don't know if you wanted to come back on that. Yeah.
I mean, I'd always been an advocate for telecare and AT, but obviously it's not just about the pendant. There's an awful lot more technology in people's homes. There's fire safety equipment. There's, there's passive monitoring systems that are used that can be proactive in terms of being able to identify when something could happen in the future. And I think we do, and as I say, I think this is a hugely exciting project, and I know that telecare and AT doesn't often speak up for itself, and apologies if anybody from Brent or Hounslow is here going, but that's nonsense. But we're moving into a new generation of telecare with the digital switchover, and I think it's going to become, obviously this is a future project as well as it is a current project, and the power we have with assistive technology to be preventative, and this, especially mentioned in your presentation, people who have dementia and also people with learning disabilities as well. And learning disabilities is a huge area that assistive technology supports people with for independent living, people that will remain resident, remain kind of, should we say, people who are supported for many, many years in the local authority. So I think I would say that any project which looks at collecting data really has to have assistive technology and telecare as part of it, because the amount of data you'll be able to get from that, and it's very separate from some of the other, I mean, for instance, in Hammersmith and Film, they've got their own systems. They don't automatically communicate with the main Mosaic system which we use, for instance, and you get a lot of data that may be missed out on. So that's my take on it anyway.
Thanks, John. Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful, and something we, the project should consider as part of a kind of wider rollout process. Anyone else has any questions, comments, or feedback? Again, please don't be shy. Either speak up or put your question in the chat. We're all a bit quiet this morning.
Is it worth, Gunther, sorry, is it worth asking everybody if they've got any ambition to want to roll out a project of this kind in their boroughs?
Very, very good question. I think we've got 2 hands now. Mark, so let's return to your question. I think Heather was first.
Thank you. Really, really inspiring and inspiration workshop and session. So thank you for sharing. I'm from the London Borough of Bromley, and actually we are working with a transformation partner, which is Sky, and looking at our digital transformation. And we are looking to do something very similar. So I'm really interested in just learning and some of that open source access information, and just really getting a hold of the presentations and maybe having some follow-up conversations with a number of the local authorities. So thank you so much, really interesting. We are beginning this journey, very much at the stage where developing the high-level business case to begin to apply for some internal investor save money to begin to roll out a number of projects, and that data repository is actually one of the projects we're looking at. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your journey. Really appreciate it.
Fantastic, thank you. And then John, did you want to
So
come in?
yeah, me again as usual. One of the things I was talking about with other colleagues regarding the data we collect is, and you've mentioned this in the presentation about the ethics and about, you know, working with residents, etc., that some people are not going to want the data to be collected. They're not going to want that information to be used. And it's one of the things that we're really mindful of, the fact that we really need to engage with the residents to make sure they know that if we do gather data from them, that it's something that's going to be used for their benefit. We do sometimes talk about the use of telecare equipment, which can monitor people's well-being, that can maybe inform on how much care that person needs. Now, that may be a good thing, but also may be a bad thing if people think the technology has been used to gather data to reduce care packages, for instance. So people are not going to want that, you know. So, and also there's this misnomer. I think people have often heard this saying, oh, you know, as technology becomes more ubiquitous, as we get used to this kind of technology, people will become more accepting of it. And I think it's exactly the opposite. I think people will actually know more about it and they want less of it. You know, the people are rejecting the likes of the Amazon Alexas of this world because they realize how much data has been collected from them. So there's going to be I think a relatively sizable amount of people who will have an issue with, depending on how the data is being collected. And this, apologies, I'm not 100% sure about exactly how you're going to collect data. I'm sure that maybe you've still got to identify that as well in certain ways, but you've got to be really careful to engage with the residents, you know, educate, get their feedback, you know, obviously have to have resident engagement, find out what they want and get them to feed into it directly, but also, you know, understanding that this is not a one-size-fits-all thing, and some people are going to say, no, I don't want my data shared, and you can't stop them from having care on the back of that, I don't think, anyway.
Yeah, it's really good points, John, and something we've been really cognizant of and careful about how we position it. And I think the main kind of counter, I'd say, is that a lot of this is information that would be shared otherwise and is already held in disparate systems. And so it's not advocating for new collections of data. It's just more effective sharing of data, which is already shared in quite immature ways. And so what we heard quite a lot is that people are, you know, if you're a practitioner within Hounslow or Brent, you're entitled to this data quite often because the patient's already consented that they're happy for services to share information, but that share between services isn't done very effectively. And so it's basically improving how data which is already shared is shared, but just through over the phone or email, by having this shared system. But I completely take your point that there's a massive ethical implication here, and it is changing how people's data is used. And I think early on, we basically said, we'll try this, we're trying it for a prototype, very low risk, very small subset of data. but the ethics board challenged us on that around actually you need to be considering engagement over the course of the prototype as well, because I kind of pitched it and positioned it as we're going to do the prototype, we're going to say here's a product that we've done, see what people think about it, and instead actually the way we're going to approach it now is try and engage in the residents throughout, and so understand what their views on it would be, how they feel about this information being shared. It's not too dissimilar to a shared care record, and a lot of our secondary research pointed to this is the sort of data which residents expect to happen and are surprised isn't happening just because of the way that the system is set up. I think most residents probably think that we are slightly more mature in how the different data sets speak to each other. And so there's some really interesting points in there about how you uncover that and how you engage effectively and make sure that you've kind of, done genuine engagement rather than just kind of like tick boxy exercises around engagement. Does that make sense?
Harry, you touched on this in your answer, but there's a comment about how this project fits in, if at all, with the digital social care records. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and so there are emerging now, so within each ICS, and so in each integrated care system, which are the things which have replaced CCGs, there are now projects to try and create integrated patient records or integrated social care records, which are in London. It's called One London, and so it's a big project to try and build these shared care records. And shared care records are very much about sharing what medication people are on, what allergies they have, discharge summaries. It's very much of the kind of provision of care to an individual, information that you need to know in able to support that provision of care. Where we're positioned slightly differently is that they are very focused on that direct provision of care and directly, you've got someone in front of you, I need to know this patient's history, I need to know what they're allergic to so I can care for them effectively. Whereas and because they're positioned like that, we found that local authorities are fairly low in the priority list of who needs to access those records and who they're targeted at. And so it's probably inappropriate and too much information sharing to give all of that information to someone working within the front door in Hounslow, because they're trying to rapidly assess an individual with the information that they've got from the individual themselves and from other practitioners to understand who should be delivering that direct care. And so rather than it being a shared care record as such, it's very much about a linkage tool, which the shared care records aren't very good at because it's so much focused around the care. And it's also inappropriate to give that level of information to someone who has no relationship with the patient, is trying to understand rapidly who's working with them, just trying to coordinate those services more effectively. And so that's where we see the difference here. And I envisage that long term, I think as shared care records become more established and more a thing, that they might make the solution redundant if they then basically see what we're doing here and say, actually, yes, there should be an aspect of a shared care record, which is you only get access to this little bit and it lists the practitioners who are involved and their contact details. And that would be really good. But I think that's quite far down in the pipeline of those. And so we almost see this as an interim solution potentially to help local authorities whilst those shared care records become more mature and access to local authorities becomes more commonplace. Because at the moment in Northwest London, shared care records aren't accessed by any of the local authorities in Northwest London, nor is data shared with the shared care record from those social services as well. So we're talking quite a long-term project here until they become more established, more mature, and more able to meet the use case that we've identified here. And so it's been really interesting understanding how, and it might be that the technology isn't available for them ever to really effectively meet that use case. And so it's about understanding and this is part of where we're going with our scalability and our toolkit and our kind of recommendations for roadmap, is that we might end up recommending that this is deployed as an interim solution by local authorities until the shared care record becomes mature enough that you can land this and it becomes an effective place over here. And so it's been really interesting getting that learning about the relationship between these emerging and exciting places, because I think the ICSs are making local authorities and health settings work together in a different way now. And we're sort of now riding the wave of that new innovation to try and support the development and deployment of this project as well. So yeah, it's interesting. And I think I think in 5 years' time, it would be a really interesting and different landscape for us to talk about. So maybe we'll come back in 5 years and see what's going on then.
Thanks, Harry. Anyone else has any questions or comments? If not, maybe we'll return to Mark's question for you. Are you thinking, what do you think about this? Are you doing something similar in your borough or organisation, or do you think this might be interesting enough for you to test? In which case the toolkit and the outputs that the project will produce might be really, really helpful on that front. Take that as a no. Please do jump in.
Sorry, I'm again Heather from Bromley, definitely interested in the toolkit and any information you're willing to share, so we might be able to use that to test it rather than starting from scratch. So really be interested in a follow-up discussion if possible. Thank you.
Absolutely, thanks, Heather. I'll share the slides with everyone via Eventbrite, so you'll have the contact details there to follow up with specific people. We've got a dedicated project page on the LOTI website where we'll add all the kind of assets and outputs that the project produces. I think we've got one final question. Are you process mapping your services as part of the project? Is the question.
Not so much process maps. No, but we can consider that for the next phase around toolkits, etc., about how these services interact with each other. So yeah, happy to explore bringing that into it if people feel that would be a useful thing for them for a toolkit. And yeah, by all means, we're happy to look into that.
John, we've got a couple of, I don't know if you've attended or planning to attend our future show and tells, but we've got a couple of other projects working in social care, front door and triage side of things, which do involve the mapping of various front door and triage processes there. So if you're interested, I can put you in touch with relevant people in those boroughs. I think last call for any final. Okay, no problem. I will connect you, John, with the right people. Any last questions, comments, or feedback for the team? I can see someone typing, feel free to speak up if easier. Fantastic. Thank you for that feedback, Louise. Louise is saying this is a great session. Well, in that case, I think we'll leave it there. You've got contact details to contact the team afterwards, but now I just want to say thank you very much to all the presenters. Thank you very much to yourselves for taking the time out and for asking some really, really good questions. I will share the slides and recording afterwards, and have a lovely day.
Thanks all. Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Bye.